What would you do if you walked into a luxury store and every employee pretended not to see you? Not because you did anything wrong, not because you couldn't afford it, but simply because your suit was wrinkled, your shoes weren't polished, and you didn't look like the kind of person they thought deserved to be welcomed. And what if I told you that man could not only afford the $8,000 jacket hanging on that rack, but also owned part of the billion-dollar fashion group behind it? This happened right in the heart of America. And the most powerful part? No one got fired, but no one was allowed to stay the same. Malik Carter stopped in front of the towering glass doors of Carter Row and Company, a luxury retail flagship nestled in the heart of Chicago's Gold Line district. The nearly floor-to-ceiling glass reflected a tall black man with a face that looked tired from an early morning flight. His white shirt had a few light creases, and his gray Brioni suit jacket, worth nearly $8,000, was slightly rumpled at the left shoulder. He gently straightened his collar and stepped inside. As the automatic doors slid open, a gust of chilled air swept through, laced with the scent of leather and expensive Italian cologne. Malik glanced around. The polished wood-paneled ceiling was still there. The soft amber lighting, meticulously designed to highlight each product, remained unchanged. Everything looked perfect, but something was off. No one greeted him. Behind the main operations desk, Savannah Blake, the morning shift manager, was glancing at a tablet while holding a latte from the cafe across the street. She glanced at Malik for barely a second, but in that second, her eyes had scanned every detail on him: the slightly wrinkled jacket, the not-so-new shoes, the unsmiling face. She tilted her head slightly, set down the tablet, and stepped from behind the counter, her voice soft but cold enough to freeze the air between them. "Excuse me, sir. Are you lost?" Malik paused. A beat of silence passed, stretching the space around them like tension in a wire. No one asks that question of a regular customer, unless they don't believe he is one. "Just browsing," Malik replied, his voice low, warm, and oddly calm. Savannah didn't smile. She turned back to the counter. No greeting, no follow-up. On the floor, a few young employees were restocking winter coats. A white couple, a man in a cashmere sweater, a woman in Louboutin heels, walked in and were immediately welcomed with radiant smiles, chilled water, and even an offer of a private stylist consultation. Malik watched the scene and nodded slightly, as if mentally taking notes. It had been 6 months since he last stepped out of his office. Not for vacation, but a necessary retreat, after a minor stroke triggered by prolonged stress. The board had advised him to take time off. They said, "Your health comes first, then the company." But Malik knew better. No one cares about the CEO's health unless he owns 80% of the shares. Carter Row & Co's was the child he had built from the ground up at 26, starting with a rundown shop in South Chicago and growing it into a luxury retail chain with over 130 locations nationwide. Now he had returned. No press conference, no entourage, no jam-packed calendar. Just an unannounced visit, exactly how he preferred it. And no one inside this flagship store, the very one featured in brand vision campaigns he had personally approved, recognized the founder standing right in front of them. A male associate passed Malik while carrying a box of leather boots toward the counter, without even a nod. Malik didn't mind. The invisibility was a gift, albeit a bitter one. He quietly walked toward the suit section. Each jacket hung neatly, every piece tagged with a refined price label in a custom serif font he'd specifically chosen. He brushed his hand against a charcoal gray Savile Row-style suit, gently feeling the hand-stitched pocket edge. The seam was off by 1 millimeter, something he would never have allowed when he personally inspected every garment.
Savannah's voice rang out behind him. "If you need help, just let us know. But just a heads up, this section is our exclusive line. Prices are a bit above average." Malik turned to look at her. No reaction, just eyes. But in those eyes were thousands of signed reports, hundreds of hours in training sessions, and dozens of retreats about brand culture. He nodded politely. "Thank you." Savannah walked away, but not completely. Malik could feel her lingering a few feet away, watching him through the mirror on the side wall. Not to assist, but to monitor. The security guard near the entrance, an older white man named Russell, had started drifting toward the men's leather bag section. He pretended to rearrange merchandise, but his vigilance was obvious. Malik turned to the accessories section and picked up a navy silk tie with silver trim, the kind he usually wore in investor meetings. Price: $2,470. He examined the tag. Something felt off. He had signed off this product line at $1,980. Malik pulled out his phone and snapped a picture. Within 10 seconds, Savannah was back. "I'm sorry, but photography inside the store is against policy." Malik raised an eyebrow. "Since when?" "3 months ago," she replied. "Legal department mandate." He knew for a fact no such policy had ever been approved by the CEO's office, and the legal department couldn't issue store policies on their own. But he said nothing. He simply nodded. "I'll delete the photo." Savannah watched him delete it on the spot. No trust, no courtesy. Malik gave a faint smile, the same one he had worn when his business loan was denied back in 2005 because he didn't look like an entrepreneur. As he turned away, Russell, the guard, had moved closer. His walkie-talkie crackled softly. Malik knew what that meant. Soft alert, silent tracking. This was no longer a visit. This was an audit. Not of staff, but of culture. The space he once called a temple of kindness was now shutting out the very man who created it, just because the first impression didn't meet expectations. And Malik, still having said nothing of who he was, silently held the tie in his hand and headed toward the register. He wanted to see what would happen next.
The tie was still on the counter, but the atmosphere around it had shifted. Malik Carter stood still, his hands clasped in front of him, his eyes just as calm as when he first walked into the store. But none of the three people facing him, Savannah, Eric, and Russell, were looking at him like a customer anymore. They were looking at him like a problem. Savannah glanced down at the payment screen, tilting her head slightly, eyes scanning. "Your card's been declined twice," she said, her voice laced with a fake politeness. "Usually that's an indication of an invalid transaction or a flagged account." Malik responded with a faint smile, the kind that required little effort to show patience. "I can call the bank right now. I know exactly why it was declined. I just flew across states this morning. The card's security system often flags unusual activity." Eric stood next to her, arms on his hips, looking him up and down. Not as if he were evaluating the product Malik wanted to buy, but evaluating Malik himself. "I understand," he said, "but we can't delay checkout operations just to wait on a phone call. Do you have another method of payment?" Malik looked down at his card, then back up. "I'd like to purchase the tie. I might also consider adding a suit. We'd suggest you check out the outlet store on the west side," Eric said, his tone dropping an octave. "Prices there might be more aligned with your financial range." Malik didn't respond immediately. He let those words hang in the air for a few more seconds, as if to feel the full weight of the condescension embedded in each syllable. "I see," he said quietly, his tone as flat as glassy water. "Thanks for the suggestion." He turned, slowly walking toward the suit display. The wood flooring beneath him wasn't overly polished, but each step seemed to stamp a question mark into the very culture he'd once built. The suits were arranged by color: light gray, charcoal, navy blue, jet black. Each tailored with a 3-layer structure, complete with fabric origin tags from Italy and price tags printed in a custom serif font. One Malik had specifically asked the design team to develop, to convey a feeling of something classic, subtle, and deliberate. He ran a hand along a double-breasted jacket with leather-wrapped buttons and a silk lining embroidered in pattern. The price tag read $7,950. He knew exactly how every dollar of that cost broke down. Nearly $1,200 in raw materials, $880 in labor at a Philadelphia workshop, $1,900 in distribution and display expenses, $280 in marketing, and the rest, profit. Profit that helped pay Savannah's salary. He took the jacket off the rack and tried it on. It fit perfectly down to the last seam. Standing in front of the large mirror, Malik tilted his head slightly, adjusting the collar. He said nothing, Did nothing out of the ordinary. Just a man trying on a jacket in the very store he had built. And then he walked back to the register. Savannah watched him approach, jacket in hand, and couldn't hide her surprise. "You want to buy that?" she asked, nearly incredulous. "Yes," Malik replied. "That tie and this jacket." Eric stepped forward. "Sir, I think it's best you leave." "Why?" Malik asked, his tone unchanged. "I haven't caused a disturbance. I'm just trying to make a purchase." "You've already caused significant disruption," Eric said, leaning slightly toward Russell, as if to signal something. "We reserve the right to refuse service to any customer if we deem it necessary." Malik gave a small nod. "I understand, but let me ask you, what's the real disruption here? A customer being declined because of his skin color, or a man trying to buy a product and being treated like a threat?" Savannah stepped forward, taking hold of the jacket. "Sir, we're no longer comfortable serving you. I'll ask our security to escort you out." Malik turned to look at Russell, the older man now standing closer, his hand resting lightly on his walkie-talkie. The air grew heavy, as though everyone was waiting for a single wrong word to ignite something. But instead of pushing back, Malik simply reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Not to film, not to call 911. He dialed a familiar number. "Nina, it's me," he said as the line connected. "I need you to initiate an urgent meeting with the manager of Store 1. On the other end, a woman's voice responded crisply. "Understood, sir. I was just about to reach out about next week's schedule, but I'll prioritize this meeting." Malik held the phone to his ear, eyes locked on Eric. "The call will go through the main office line in 30 seconds. Eric took a small step back. "The main office line?" "Yes. The general manager's desk, the phone right next to the security monitor screen." Savannah squinted. "Who are you?" Malik didn't answer. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then the phone behind the counter rang, a simple ringtone, yet its sound echoed like a fire alarm. Eric froze. Savannah took a step back. Russell removed his hand from the walkie-talkie. Malik still held his phone. "You can pick that up, Eric. That call is for you." Eric swallowed hard, turned around, and walked into the office. A second later, his voice could be heard through the glass door. "Yes, sir. He's standing right here." Malik hung up and slipped his phone back into his breast pocket. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to say a word. Because at that moment, all three of them finally understood. The man in the wrinkled suit they had refused to serve was the founder and CEO of Carter Row and Company, the $2.7 billion company they worked for every single day. The phone inside Eric Daly's office was still ringing, but the entire store had fallen into a strange silence. Like everyone was waiting for something to happen, yet no one dared to be the first to move. Malik stood upright, his gaze calm, while Savannah remained frozen, as if trying to piece together the fragments in her mind, but each attempt only made the picture more wrong. Eric stepped into the office and picked up the receiver. From outside, through the glass panel, Malik watched his expression shift second by second. First surprise, then doubt, then disbelief. Finally, panic. Eric spoke quickly, nodding repeatedly. After a few seconds, he emerged from the office like a man who'd seen a ghost. No trace of the arrogance or authority he had displayed before. He looked straight at Malik, not a judgmental glance this time, but the stare of a man who had just realized a critical mistake had been made, one that might cost him his entire career. "Mr. Carter, I didn't know." Malik gently raised a hand, signaling him to stop. He didn't need an apology. Not yet. "I want to buy a tie," he repeated, his tone unchanged. "The one you refused to sell me because you assumed I couldn't afford it." Savannah was now standing behind the counter, her face pale as if all the blood had drained from it. She swallowed hard and picked up the navy silk tie with trembling hands. She couldn't speak. Her eyes fluttered between shame, fear, and confusion. Malik didn't blink. "I want to experience this store like any other customer," he said clearly, articulating every word. "Not more. Not less. I want to be welcomed like that white couple earlier. I want to be consulted like a regular client. I want to be invited to your VIP program, offered a drink, and shown matching accessories. I don't want to be treated like a suspect. I want to buy this tie, exactly the way I once dreamed every person walking into Carter Row and Company would feel Savannah could barely lift her head. Malik turned to Eric. And I want to pay for it with the exact same card you assume was fake. He took out his AMEX Platinum again. The air grew heavier. No one spoke. No one moved. But everyone was watching Savannah's hands as she took the card with both of hers. This time with no flashlight, no swiping her finger over the raised numbers. She slid it into the reader, her hands still slightly shaking. A beep sounded. The screen read, "Approved, no error, no decline, no suspicion." Savannah printed the receipt, still unable to meet Malik's eyes. "Thank you for your purchase," she murmured. Malik smiled, but this time, it wasn't forgiveness. It was awareness laced with irony. "Now you see me as a customer?" She didn't answer. Malik tucked the receipt into his wallet, picked up the tie box, carefully wrapped, embossed with the brand's wax seal, and walked away from the counter. No send-off needed. But he didn't go far. He turned, looking back at Eric. "I'm calling for an emergency meeting here. Today. Every employee on this shift is to attend." Eric nodded rapidly. "Yes, of course." Mr. Carter. Malik glanced at Russell, the man who had hovered like a silent shadow all morning, and spoke slowly, clearly, without raising his voice. "I didn't feel safe in a space I built with my own hands." Russell lowered his eyes. Malik turned and walked toward the central display, where a porcelain plaque bore the company's vision statement. "Every interaction is a chance to show respect. Every customer is a person first." He stared at it, as if asking himself, who forgot this first? The employees or him? Just then, a young female associate stepped out from the fitting rooms, holding a folded silk scarf. She passed Malik, nodded gently, then stopped. "Hello. Good morning, sir." Malik looked at her, slightly surprised, and nodded back. "Good morning." She had no idea who he was, but she had done what no manager, no senior employee, and no decision-maker in this store had done all day. Greeted a customer like a human being. A simple act, one that should have been standard. Malik turned and called out to Eric. "Prep the internal meeting room. I want to start in 20 minutes. Everyone working today needs to be there." Eric fumbled. "Yes, sir. I'll use the PA system immediately." Malik gave a slight nod, then walked over to the customer lounge and sat down. In his hand, he still held the tie box, the $2,470 tie. But it wasn't an accessory anymore. It was evidence. Evidence of a system gone wrong, a training program ignored, a cultural shift abandoned halfway. And he, the founder of it all, had to endure humiliation to uncover it. Malik Carter sat quietly on the leather sofa, his gaze fixed on the center of the store like a man listening to the heartbeat of the very institution he had poured his youth into building. In his hands was the navy silk tie, no longer a symbol of luxury, but now something more like a beautifully packaged indictment. The familiar sounds of the store seemed to change tone. The barcode scanner now rang out dryly, and the employees' footsteps had grown heavy, as if everyone were walking across a floor made of glass. Eric Daly stood a few feet away, the internal phone pressed to his ear, as he summoned all on-duty staff to an emergency meeting. Malik didn't look at him, nor at Savannah, the morning shift manager who had just denied him service as if he were a wandering vagrant. He was staring at the display shelves, the brand posters, and the phrases like integrity, elegance, inclusiveness, printed in elegant font beside products priced at nearly $10,000, asking himself, when did these words become hollow? When did employees stop practicing what they were trained to treat as guiding principles? And when did the policies he personally approved turn into tools that excluded people like himself? A young employee approached timidly. "Mr. Carter, would you like some water or coffee?" Malik nodded gently. "Water is fine." The young man walked off, visibly nervous but at least genuine. Malik watched him for a moment, then turned back toward the main counter, where Savannah stood uneasily beside Eric. Malik called out, "Savannah!" She flinched. Yes, Mr. Carter." "Can you explain to me the store's no photography policy?" Savannah froze. "Yes. Legal sent out an internal email back in April. I remember there was a PDF with instructions." "Did you read it?" "Yes, sir. I recall it saying that customers shouldn't photograph price tags to avoid leaking design or pricing strategy information. Malik stared at her for a few seconds before continuing. Do you know who approved that policy? I, I think it was the legal department or maybe a regional director. You think, or you know? Savannah was speechless. Malik nodded slightly. I'm not asking to blame you. I'm asking because it's become clear. This policy is now being used as a default excuse to exclude anyone who doesn't look like the ideal customer. Isn't that right? Savannah lowered her head. She didn't answer. Malik turned to Eric. So who authorized this no photography policy? Eric awkwardly opened his tablet, skimming emails. I, I see a notice from Hannah Wiles, head of legal for the Northwest region, but I don't see your signature on it. Malik gave a cold smile. Of course not. I didn't sign it. And Hannah isn't authorized to implement system-wide policies. She's required to propose and await approval. No one in my office signed off on this. Yet she issued it, and you enforced it. Eric's face flushed red. I was just following orders. Orders from whom? From the internal system, sir. Malik nodded. That's how failing systems work. No one takes real responsibility. Everyone hides behind the phrase, just following orders. He stood and walked slowly toward the customer service counter, where a board read, Membership and Policy. He raised a hand and pointed to the text posted at the bottom. This policy was changed 4 months ago. No official announcement, no press release, no update on the website. Why? Eric said nothing. Malik continued, because you didn't think a discriminatory policy would be noticed, especially if it only affected a customer group you assumed would never speak up. Savannah lifted her chin. I didn't mean that truly. I just followed what came from above. And when I saw you taking a photo, I thought I had to play my part as a manager. Malik turned to her, not angry, but firm. The role of a manager is not mechanical enforcement. The role of a manager is to discern right from wrong in policy and to uphold the core values of the organization when policy goes astray. If I had wanted everything run like a robot, I would have replaced the entire system with AI 2 years ago. A silence blanketed the central section of the store. Casual customers had started to drift away, but a few lingered, pretending to browse while quietly watching everything unfold. Malik didn't care. This was no longer a private conversation. This was a public hearing. He turned his gaze toward the ceiling security camera, then looked at Eric. The cameras are recording all of this, right? Yes, sir. Good. I want the full footage. No edits, no cuts, from the moment I entered the store until now. I'll be using it for new training material. Eric gaped. Training? For what, sir? Malik stepped closer, standing directly in front of him. Implicit bias training. We're going to rewrite the entire employee training program, from behavioral reflexes to incident handling. And this video will be the opening segment. Savannah couldn't hold back. Tears began to stream down her cheeks. Malik didn't look away. If you feel hurt by that, try imagining what I felt this morning. And more importantly, imagine how thousands of Black, Latinx, Asian, LGBTQ+ customers have felt walking into stores like this and being seen as threats simply because they didn't fit the image you expected. No one spoke. Every sound suddenly felt distant, as if the store had shifted into another dimension. It was no longer just a retail space. It had become a place where truth was being unwrapped. Malik Carter placed the tie box down on the oak table near the internal meeting area, his eyes drifting across the row of mirrors lining the hallway, before settling on security camera number 4, mounted high above. He knew the camera layout well. He had personally approved the optimized surveillance plan years ago to protect customer rights in the event of complaints. He had once believed that cameras were there to detect fraud. Only now did he realize they were just as necessary for exposing bias, especially when it came from within. Eric Daly returned from his call with the internal IT department. All footage has been saved, Mr. Carter. Security will send the full recording to your private email. Within the hour, Malik gave a slight nod. Good. I want the entire behavior chain recorded, not to punish individuals, but to make clear just how far we've drifted from our founding principles. Savannah Blake stood behind him, her shoulders trembling slightly, still unable to breathe normally. She had realized something far worse than being fired, becoming a living example in a system-wide ethics lesson that was about to be rewritten from the ground up. Malik checked his watch. 15 minutes left before the emergency meeting he had called was set to begin. He slowly walked back toward the main register, the place where, just an hour ago, he had been asked to show ID for a product whose price he had personally approved 3 months earlier. He rested his hand on the counter, not knocking, not drawing attention, just silently observing the POS terminal. The same machine that had declined his platinum card twice. The same card he had once used to close a $12 million deal only a few months earlier. The card was still in his wallet, quiet, cold, and now the clearest symbol of irony, that his financial power had been dismissed simply because his skin didn't match someone's mental picture of a VIP customer. Malik took the card out again. He turned to Eric. "Do you remember what Savannah said when I handed her this card?" Eric hesitated. I think she checked the raised numbers." "No," Malik cut him off. "She said, 'This card looks odd. Where did you get it?'" He repeated it word for word, like reading a formal charge in a courtroom. "Where did I get it? Do you know the last time someone asked me that?" Eric didn't answer. Malik didn't wait. 2009, a bank rejected my real estate loan, even though I had the credit, the collateral, and a financial plan more thorough than anyone they'd seen. The reason? The underwriter didn't believe someone like me fully understood what he was signing. 16 years later, that question comes back, this time from an employee of the very company I founded.
Savannah's breathing hitched, as if she wanted to speak but didn't dare. Malik didn't look at her. He looked straight at the card reader and then spoke again, almost to himself. This wasn't a system error. It wasn't about the card being declined. It was the reaction after the decline, the eyes, the tone, the unspoken assumption that something must be wrong. That's why no one thought to let the customer call the bank. Instead, they called management. That's why the card was treated like evidence of fraud instead of a routine technical hiccup. Eric lowered his head, speechless. Malik went on. "Let me ask you, if the person handing over the card had been a white man in a Zegna suit wearing an Omega watch, would the reaction have been the same?" Eric said nothing. "Don't answer. I already know the answer is no." Malik stepped toward the accessories counter, where a few employees were still arranging belts and scarves. He didn't want to humiliate anyone in front of others, but he also couldn't let what happened be dismissed as a mere, unfortunate incident. He turned around, addressing everyone, from the staff to the customers nearby. "I used to believe that internal policy was enough to guide behavior, that with the right training, people would act the right way. But this morning I learned something else. Policy cannot override instinct without self-awareness. We built this system to reward compliance, but forgot that complying with the wrong policy can be dangerous." Malik walked to the center of the store, where the skylight above let in a stream of natural light through the ceiling. He stood there and held up his platinum card, tilting it so the light reflected off the raised numbers. "This card doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is what it made you think of me, before you knew who I was." Eric stepped forward. "Mr. Carter, I accept full responsibility for my response, and that of my team. We were wrong." Malik studied him for a few seconds. "You weren't wrong for following procedure. You were wrong for choosing to treat someone worse simply because they didn't match what you're used to. That's not a procedural failure. That's a psychological one." He placed the card back in his wallet, then looked around the store once more. "Starting today, no transaction over $500 will require ID unless there's an actual fraud flag in the system. No more judgment based on appearance, clothing, or voice. Every violation will be documented and included in recurring training, and I will personally oversee implementation." Savannah nodded, visibly shaking. Eric clenched his hands and let out a breath. Malik turned to leave, but before he stepped away from the center of the store, he stopped and spoke without looking at anyone. "I used to be proud that Carter Row was a place where customers felt seen. Today, I was not seen." He turned his head. "But I saw all of you, very clearly."
Malik Carter stood in the center of the store, still holding the tie box, while the space around him had grown far too quiet for a typical morning. The employees had gathered as summoned by Eric Daly, who was now trying to reassemble the team like a homeroom teacher scrambling before an unannounced inspection. Malik didn't need to say anything further. Everyone had heard, everyone had seen, and the silence now spoke louder than any apology. They hadn't just witnessed their CEO being refused service. They had witnessed the collapse of a brand culture they had been taught since day one, a culture that no longer existed in practice. Malik looked at each face. Some lowered their heads, some avoided his gaze. Some looked genuinely uneasy. But the saddest realization was this. None of them looked truly shocked. Because a black man in a suit being treated with suspicion in a luxury store wasn't rare. Even in a space that marketed itself with the slogan, "Every customer, every time." He turned to Eric. "Do you think I had the right to call the police this morning?" Eric blinked, looked up, but didn't answer. Malik continued, "I was refused service, accused of using a fake card, asked to leave my own store, and through all of that, no one asked what I needed. All you thought about was how to handle a customer who didn't look like your idea of a typical shopper. You called me a disruption. You didn't ask who I was. You didn't ask why I was here. You just wanted me gone." Eric opened his mouth, but Malik raised his hand. "Not yet. I'm not finished." He turned to Savannah. "And you used policy as a weapon. You didn't ask if I was shopping for a gift. You didn't ask if I needed help. You didn't introduce the VIP program. You didn't offer to wrap the item. You just looked at me and judged." Malik walked back to the register where everything had started. He set the tie box down again, this time like evidence in a courtroom, and looked at the employees who now stood around him in a loose semicircle. "I'm standing here, inside a system I built, realizing I wasn't welcome. I wasn't trusted. I wasn't seen as a customer. No one stood up when my card was questioned. No one spoke out when I was asked to leave. You've all grown so used to staying silent in the face of wrong. It's become culture." A young employee raised their hand reflexively. "Mr. Carter, I've only been here for 4 weeks. I didn't think—" Malik nodded slightly, his tone softening. "I understand, and I don't blame you. You're not infected yet. But those who've been here 3, 5, 8 years, they don't get a pass. They may not have insulted me directly, but their silence was complicity." He turned back to Eric. "Let me ask you something. If I had really been a stranger this morning, not the CEO, do you think I would have been treated more fairly if I were white?" Eric swallowed hard. I'm not sure." Malik didn't wait. "Then let me be sure for you. No." He slowly circled the staff. "I want everyone to imagine something. What if the man from this morning had been your father? What if he came home and told you he was refused a purchase, treated like a fraud, just because his suit was a little wrinkled? How would you feel?" Silence. No one answered. Malik stood still in that silence, arms crossed. "I don't need apologies. I don't need tears. I need change." He looked at Eric. "Effective immediately, Store 1, our first and largest location, will be the pilot site for a new service model. Blind dignity, service without assumption, approach without judgment, respect without condition." Eric nodded. Malik continued, "All transactions over $500 will not require ID unless there's an actual fraud flag in the system. Every employee must participate in a customer interaction program that prohibits response based on skin tone, attire, or accent. And every violation will be documented and sent to the CEO's office weekly." Savannah raised her hand slightly. "Mr. Carter, Malik looked at her. "You will not be fired, but you will be the first to go through the pilot program. And you will recount what happened this morning during the training session, not as a victim, but as someone brave enough to face it." Savannah began to cry. Malik didn't comfort her, but he didn't shame her either. "You will recount everything, from the way you looked at me when I entered, to what you thought when you saw me take a photo, to the moment you doubted my card was real. And after each section, you will ask yourself, why did I think that? That question, if asked enough, will change the system." He turned to Russell. "And you, Russell, a former officer, a man with years of experience. When you saw me trying on a suit, what did you think?" Russell stammered. I thought maybe you were doing something unusual. Unusual? Like what? Trying on clothes? Russell said nothing. Malik nodded. You'll be part of rebuilding our security protocol. I want the new approach to begin not with suspicion, but with fair observation. Difference doesn't always mean risk. Sometimes it's the chance for the system to prove it's better than people expect. He took a step back, letting his eyes sweep across the entire team. I used to think building a system was enough, but I forgot. If the people inside that system don't carry its values in their hearts, the system will eventually harm what it was built to protect. He let out a long breath. Today, the man who wasn't welcome was me. Tomorrow, it might be a black child shopping for a birthday gift, an Asian woman in an old coat, a Spanish-speaking customer with broken English. I can't be everywhere to protect them, but you can. If you understand that today's lesson wasn't about a platinum card, it was about something we still deny each other far too often, the right to exist without being judged. Malik walked toward the front doors, where daylight spilled onto the marble floor. He didn't step outside. He just stood there, as if to make it unmistakably clear. Today, he wasn't asked to leave. He stayed. He belonged here. And from this day forward, this place would have to change, until it was worthy of anyone bold enough to walk through its doors. Malik Carter still stood at the threshold, not to leave, but to assert that he would not walk out unless it was by his own choice. While many employees remained frozen by the weight of what had just transpired, the midday light filtered through the tall glass panes and fell in a bright, golden stripe across the polished stone floor, casting a line across Malik's face. A line separating the Malik who had been dismissed from the Malik who now stood, unveiled and unapologetically present. He turned around, his gaze sweeping the entire space like a true owner, reclaiming his ground. He didn't need to raise his voice, slam a table, or declare his authority. His words cut through the strange silence that blanketed the store. I need an emergency call, right now. Eric Daly stepped forward without question, only nodding. Malik pulled his phone from the inner pocket of his suit and dialed a number he knew by heart. The line rang once before a voice answered, Jennifer speaking. Malik didn't introduce himself. Initiate an emergency conference call with the entire senior management team, regional supervisors, legal, and HR. Priority, Store 1. Jennifer's tone immediately sharpened. Yes, Mr. Carter. Would you prefer to open the call via internal line or virtual conference room? Malik scanned the space, his eyes landing on the internal phone mounted near the management office. I'm standing inside Store 1. Patch it through to the general manager's office. Connect now. Understood. Please hold while I route the call. Eric watched Malik like a man realizing he had unwittingly played the villain in a story he didn't know was being filmed. Malik didn't look at him. He simply walked to the internal phone and lifted the receiver just as the ring started. The light on the line blinked green. Another voice came through. This is the Carter Row and Company. Emergency conference system. You are connected to all designated departments. Please confirm to begin. Malik spoke clearly, enunciating every word. This is Malik Carter. The meeting is now in session. The store remained utterly still. No one spoke, but the air had clearly shifted. From beyond the showroom floor, both staff and customers had become involuntary witnesses to an unprecedented announcement. Malik didn't need cameras. He knew that from this moment on, everything he said would ripple across the entire organization. No headlines, no edits, no filters. He turned to Eric and Savannah, his voice lower but unwavering. I called this meeting to make a formal statement. The service culture of Carter Row & Co. has deviated drastically from its founding mission. This morning, I, as a customer, was treated with suspicion, rejection, insult, and asked to leave inside the flagship store of the company I founded. The sound of rapid typing echoed faintly from the other end, someone transcribing the meeting. Malik continued, eyes fixed on the staff before him. I don't need an internal investigation. I don't need a special task force. I lived the experience, not through reports, but through every glance, every gesture, every word spoken when they believed I was just another man who couldn't afford his own product. A female employee near the fitting rooms covered her mouth. Savannah stood frozen like a statue. Eric stared at the floor. Malik glanced at the camera near the door, then spoke slightly louder. I'm ordering a full relaunch of our dignity-based service training, version 3.0, beginning immediately at Store 1. Personally overseen by me, not the cost-cut version, not the copy-paste template from last year, the original, the mandatory. A voice from the call responded, acknowledged. The training department has received your directive. Do you require a specific timeline, Mr. Carter? Malik replied, I want 100% of Store 1's staff to complete the first round within 5 days. Then we scale it company-wide within 30 days. I will be conducting unannounced follow-up visits to every location. The store was silent. A whisper broke the quiet from one of the staff. He really is the CEO. Malik heard it, but didn't react. He stared into the phone and said, let me be perfectly clear. Any internal feedback that delays, downplays, or diminishes the importance of this initiative will be considered a breach of senior corporate ethics. Any manager involved will be placed under review for promotion eligibility and leadership retention. Eric was now visibly sweating. He started to speak, but Malik raised a hand. You don't need to say anything right now, Eric. Your actions will speak for you. Malik placed his hand on the checkout counter, the same one where he'd been asked earlier to step aside for disrupting operations. He tapped the surface gently, then returned to the call. This meeting is being recorded and will be replayed during the all-hands company briefing next Monday. I want every employee in stores, in warehouses, in accounting, and in the executive office to hear my voice say this. No one should be denied because they don't dress like they have money. No one should be treated with suspicion because they don't match the brochure. No one should walk into a space and be made to feel like they don't belong. Someone began to quietly cry after that line. Malik didn't turn toward them. He kept going. I'm not returning just to lead. I'm returning to make this company worthy of its name again. The call remained still for a beat. Then Jennifer's voice returned. All directives have been logged. Minutes will be sent immediately following this meeting. Anything else, Mr. Carter? Malik looked toward the door, his expression softening slightly. Yes, one last thing. He turned, walked toward the checkout counter, and picked up the suit jacket he had tried on earlier, still hanging near the register. He straightened the shoulder, then placed it neatly on the counter. I want to purchase this jacket, not as the CEO, but as the man who was denied the right to buy something he loved this morning. I want to see whether this system has the courage to correct itself, not through apology, but through action. Savannah stepped forward, hands trembling. Malik handed her the American Express Platinum card. No one asked for ID. No one double-checked. No one hesitated. The scanner beeped. Approved. Savannah printed the receipt, her eyes red, and placed it in front of him. Malik took it and looked at her, not with anger, but with calm resolve. I don't expect perfection. I just expect decency. He picked up the jacket, the tie box, and turned to Eric. I'll leave a copy of the meeting transcript here. Hang it somewhere the customers can see it. Eric nodded without speaking. Malik turned toward the door. This time he walked out, but not like he had walked in. Tired, judged, diminished. This time he walked out as a man who had reset the foundation of what the entire system had forgotten. Unconditional respect. The automatic doors closed quietly behind Malik Carter, but no one inside the store truly returned to their tasks. No one had the composure to pick up a product. No one whispered. No one moved. What they had just witnessed wasn't a routine corporate visit. It was a reckoning, not because of a title, but because a man had spoken, not with anger, but with something that froze the entire room. The truth. But Malik hadn't left completely. After stepping through the glass doors, he didn't head to a car. He stood just outside, leaning against a structural pillar near the main entrance, where customers often waited for rides. In his hand was still the box containing the expensive tie, but his eyes stared into the distance. A breeze rustled the hem of his coat. He was waiting, and as he expected, the first to step outside wasn't a manager or regional director. It was the intern, the young woman who had been holding back tears the entire time during the meeting. She approached timidly, still holding the sticker sheet she had been tasked with removing before noon. Malik noticed, gave a subtle nod. She stood about 3 paces away from him. Neither of them said anything for 10 seconds. Then she spoke, voice small but sincere. I, I didn't know. I didn't know who you were, but I know that feeling. Malik looked at her, not prompting, not pressuring. She continued, as if releasing something that had built up. I've worked at 3 other stores. They always told us, pay attention to the customers who look like they'll buy. Don't waste time on the ones who are just here to look. Malik smiled, not because it amused him, but because he understood. I always thought that was wrong, she said, but I never said anything, because if I did, I was afraid they'd cut my shifts. Or worse, call me unproductive. Malik nodded gently. What's your name? And he asked. Jade, she replied. You're the first person from that store to step outside and say this, Jade. That makes you different. A few other employees began to gather at the door, hesitating. Among them was Eric, who didn't dare step out fully. Just stood there watching from a distance. Malik didn't pay him any mind. He looked back at Jade, voice calm and steady. Jade, I want you to remember this. When someone says kindness is weakness, naive, or a waste of time, smile. Then prove them wrong by doing your job better than they ever could. No yelling, no arguing, just consistency. Jade nodded. She quietly turned to go. But as she walked away, Malik called out, Jade! She turned. Next week, you'll receive a formal invitation from the regional leadership office. Check your email and be ready. Her eyes widened as if to ask something, but Malik's look gently said, Don't ask now. She nodded again, this time walking away with her shoulders straighter. Malik remained standing. Another employee stepped out. This time it was Sam, the security staffer who had checked his bag that morning. Sam approached, removed his employee badge, and bowed his head. I have no excuse. I just wanted to apologize. Malik didn't accept the apology immediately. He looked Sam in the eyes. I don't want your apology if it only comes because you now know who I am. What I want to know is, if this morning I were still just a black man in a wrinkled suit, would you have apologized? Sam was silent. Malik nodded. That's the question you need to ask yourself. Not to answer to me, but to yourself. Sam stood motionless, nodded slightly, and turned back toward the door. Malik didn't stop him. He knew some lessons don't require lectures. They just need time and stillness to take root. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Jennifer. Footage confirmed. Camera feed has been sent to HQ. Media inquiries have begun. How would you like to respond? Malik looked at the screen, then tapped his voice memo app and recorded slowly. No email replies. No press release. When they ask, tell them, CEO Malik Carter will respond. Not from his office, but from the exact place he was once denied. In person. No script. No PR team. That's how I intend to speak to the world. He stopped recording and hit send. From across the plaza, an older man who had been sitting unnoticed on a stone bench near the store stood up and walked toward Malik. Dressed in a worn coat, faded jeans, and a low canvas cap, he said, I've never seen a CEO do what you just did, and I've lived long enough to see a lot of rich men who never learned how to bow their heads. Malik smiled, asked simply, And what do you think? The older man nodded. I think today it wasn't a CEO speaking. It was someone who's walked through the wrong doors, been seen the wrong way, and still chose to walk forward, not to change others, but to correct himself. And by doing that, you change this whole place. Malik said thank you, not with words, but with his eyes. As the sun began to shift across the parking lot pavement, Malik walked away, not to headquarters, not back to a corner office. He crossed the street to a small coffee shop across from the shopping center, the same one he had planned to visit that morning but changed his mind. He stepped in, ordered a black coffee, and sat in the back corner, where no one recognized who he was. And there, for the first time all day, he exhaled. Not because he was tired, but because he had said what needed to be said. Not as a CEO, but as a man who had once been turned away and now simply wanted to do the right thing. Not to punish, but to remember why he ever began. 2 minutes and 47 seconds. That's how long the video was. No background music, no dramatic effects, no flashy subtitles scrolling across the screen. Just the image of a black man in a wrinkled suit, standing in the employee meeting room of a luxury store and speaking in a voice that was low, clear, and steady. He didn't accuse. He didn't threaten. He didn't interrupt. He simply recounted, using a kind of silence so powerful it flipped the atmosphere on its head. The footage was captured by the internal security camera. A copy was automatically sent to corporate HQ for disciplinary review, per standard protocol. But the person overseeing that process, Jennifer, paused the video at the 14-second mark. She didn't press play, she rewound, then fast-forwarded, then watched the entire clip. When it ended, she stared at the screen, unsure of what she had just seen. A speech? A warning? Or an underground tremor in the world of commerce? One she hadn't felt in 12 years working in corporate systems? Jennifer didn't share the video with anyone else in the company right away. Instead, she sent it, without caption, to a single email address: josh.tanaka@halsteadmedia.org. A college friend of hers, now an investigative journalist at an independent outlet known for uncovering the buried in places that claim to be the most civilized. She included just one line: "Watch it all before you ask." Josh opened the video at 1:13 a.m. By 1:19 a.m., he replied with a single message: "Is this real?" Jennifer responded, "Yes. The man in the video is the CEO. He didn't announce himself. The store had no idea, and no one planned to release this footage." At 1:22 a.m., Josh called her. "I want to interview him, but not in a studio. I want to interview him right at that table where he stood." Jennifer hesitated, then said, "I don't know if he'll agree, but I know he didn't do this to end up in the news." Josh nodded. "Good, because I'm not interested in putting him in the news. I want to put the truth there." The next morning, the video wasn't officially released, but it surfaced. Someone inside the store, identity unknown, uploaded the clip to an internal employee forum originally built for sharing shift swaps, duty rosters, and the occasional customer horror story. But this time, no one laughed. No one cursed. The very first comment read, "Everything I've ever questioned, he said it for me." Others quickly followed. From Mike, a doorman, "I've stood at that entrance for 6 years. No one ever looked at me like a human being, until that man." A retail associate in Seattle, "I once lost a bonus for not engaging enough VIPs. If he had walked in that day, I probably would have overlooked an entire human being." Within 48 hours, the clip had spread across internal networks from New York to San Diego, Chicago to Dallas, Houston to Boston. Not as a training fail, but as a new scripture for the forgotten working class. The most quoted line wasn't a warning or a reprimand. It was, "I don't need to be treated differently because I'm a CEO. I just refuse to be treated like I don't exist." The corporate board, executives who hadn't set foot in a store outside of annual galas, panicked. An emergency meeting convened at headquarters. 8 men, 2 women, all in suits, all holding reports on media risk, stock impact, information leaks, and brand fallout. But what they didn't expect? Malik Carter didn't attend that meeting.
He sent a video, not a press conference, not an apology. Just a quiet clip of him sitting at a small coffee shop across from the very store where it happened. The note included with the video read, "While the system worries about the clip being leaked, I've chosen to keep it. Not to protect myself, but to remind us. It's time we start having this conversation again, in a different voice." The video was forwarded to the entire company. No restrictions, no watermarks, no signatures. And the first person to share it publicly? Jade, the intern who had walked out to speak first. She didn't write a long caption. Just, "I used to think staying silent was survival. But that day, someone showed me that speaking up, at the right moment, could be the beginning of a new system." Her post reached 1.7 million views in 18 hours. That's when the press began to notice. But when they contacted the company, the official response was, "The CEO is not scheduling any press appearances at this time. He is listening." And that silence, intentional and unwavering, only made the media dig deeper. Business ethics forums began quoting Malik's words as a new framework for power. No desk pounding, no dramatic exits, just truth, spoken calmly and left to echo. A major TV network, known for exposés on CEOs accused of discrimination, aired its first segment with the title, "When the CEO is the one being rejected, and his response makes an entire industry pause." The story reached places no one expected. A university in Minnesota launched a symposium titled, "Quiet Leadership and the Culture of Silent Accountability." A restaurant chain in Arizona issued a memo to all employees. Do not judge customers by card or clothing. If you feel uncertain, remember, Malik Carter once stood in front of someone just like us. And within Carter Row and Company itself, employees began requesting transfers, not for better pay, but to work in stores where listening is being relearned. Corporate was forced to revamp their entire customer evaluation system, no longer using sales metrics alone, but human interaction scores. Jennifer, the one who first saved the video, was asked by legal to submit the full original recording. She replied with one sentence, "I already submitted it, to my conscience. If the system wants to erase it, it must also accept the weight of that silence." No one dared delete it. By the end of the week, Josh, the journalist, finally received a message from Malik agreeing to meet. But not at the office, not in a studio. At the same coffee shop from before. Malik arrived early, wearing a light coat. No assistant. When Josh entered, Malik asked one simple question. "Are you planning to edit this video?" Josh shook his head. "Number. And I think the best thing we can do is not explain it. Let people watch it for themselves." Malik smiled. "Then keep it. Don't turn it into a campaign." Josh asked, "What do you think made this video resonate with so many people?" Malik paused, then said, "Because in those 2 minutes and 47 seconds, no one tried to be right. Just a man who once got it wrong, stood up and told the truth. Without fear."
Malik Carter didn't fire anyone after the video went viral. There was no press conference, no internal email announcing executive reshuffles, no severance packages released to the public. In a system that had long relied on the lash to enforce authority, that silence sent shockwaves through headquarters. On Monday morning, instead of the usual emergency meeting, every senior employee found a gray envelope placed neatly on their desk. No sender's name, just the company logo, and one embossed line, "Reorient." Inside was a white sheet of paper with 2 paragraphs. The first read, "If you feel you've done nothing wrong, you're right. But if you feel you've done nothing, then you're wrong." The second paragraph was a mandatory schedule, a 4-day operational culture reorientation workshop to be held at the very store where the incident took place. Attendance was non-negotiable. No substitutes were allowed, and no exceptions for title or rank. On day 1, Malik stood before the regional directors. No podium, no projector, no assistant. He wore a plain white shirt, gray khakis, and held a brown folder. Once everyone was present, he said, "I won't fire anyone here today, but I also won't protect anyone from their own conscience." Then he handed out reports, not revenue charts, but handwritten notes, customer complaint letters, and frontline staff feedback from the past 2 years. All of it had been ignored, brushed aside, or dumped into a folder labeled "Handle Later." He didn't read any of them aloud. Instead, he asked each person to pick one at random, read it in silence, then stand and share how it made them feel. No one stood at first. By the third person, a middle-aged woman named Martha, East Coast Regional Director, broke down in tears. "I remember this email. I dismissed it as a difficult customer, but now, reading it again, they just wanted to be treated like a human being." Malik didn't nod, didn't judge. He simply said, "We can be wrong, but the scariest moment is when we stop feeling anything about being wrong." On day 2, Malik didn't show up. Instead, Mr. Eddie, the elderly security guard who had once held the door open for Malik in that wrinkled suit, walked in wearing a temporary name tag. He was introduced as the storyteller from below. He didn't lecture. He just told stories about how he was once warned for greeting customers too cheerfully if they weren't well dressed, about how he once watched a little girl get blocked by security just for holding a handmade sign that read first shopping trip with mom, about how he once saw a man, hands trembling, face weathered by sun, walk in with a platinum card, only to be denied because he didn't have the look. At the end, Mr. Eddie didn't ask a single question, but the room was silent. A director named Julian, who managed the Chicago region, whispered, "I didn't know he'd been here that long." Another asked, "Why don't we know his name?" And in that moment, someone once treated as a ghost within the system made those at the top of the pyramid question if they even understood what the system truly was. On day 3, Malik returned, this time with a different folder, not about employees but about customers who had once submitted complaints and never came back. He didn't read them one by one. He simply asked, "Does anyone here recognize any of these faces?" No one responded. He nodded. "Then today isn't about revenue. It's about departures." He split them into 5 groups. Each group was assigned one former customer. Their task was to find that person, not to apologize, but to ask, "What did we make you feel?" that no one else ever asked about. That afternoon, senior directors, used to glass-walled offices and chauffeured rides, were on the phone with people they'd once overlooked. Some didn't pick up, some cursed them out, but some cried. One woman named Linda, previously denied a purchase because she couldn't prove permanent residency, said, "I never thought anyone from that company would ever ask me a question like that." On the final day, Malik didn't speak. He stood in the back of the room. A large screen displayed a single line, no slides, just this: "Who here has ever seen something wrong and did nothing?" No one raised their hand at first, then 1, then 3, then everyone. Malik stepped forward. "Then today, you're not being fired, but you're no longer allowed to stand still." A week later, Malik introduced a new policy, the Humane Response Policy, mandating that no store could evaluate customers based on any non-quantifiable factors, including clothing, language, skin color, or how they entered. More importantly, any employee wishing to report discrimination, without going through a manager, could do so directly through a new portal called Whisperline, overseen by the CEO's office itself. Internally, Malik launched No Manager Days. Once a month, every regional director had to work a frontline shift. No title badge, no priority card, and no one was allowed to opt out. The ones used to giving orders now had to take customer calls, handle returns, and hear the same lines they once thought only low-level staff had to endure. "Can you go any faster? I want to speak to your manager. Stop blaming the system." One director named Alan, known for being cold and aloof, sent Malik a private email after his first shift at the San Jose branch. One part read, "I thought I understood my team. Turns out I only understood the metrics. The first time a customer called me the wrong name, I wanted to correct them. But then I remembered, they've done that to so many others, and I never said a word." Malik replied with a single line, "Welcome to the truth." No one was fired, but no one could stay still. Each branch was now required to submit a real experience map every month, detailing one specific moment they had witnessed, ignored, and how they had chosen to make it right. Not for evaluation, but as a reminder, the system isn't fixed with logic, it's fixed through behavior. And something strange happened. Revenue didn't decline, it rose. Not in a flashy spike, but steadily and deeply. But what rose the most wasn't found in any spreadsheet. It was in the way customers walked in, less guarded, no longer wary, and the way employees greeted them, no longer fearful, no longer evasive. A new culture began to take shape, not through slogans, but through repeated acts by those who once stayed silent. 3 weeks after the operational culture reorientation, not a single internal memo mentioned that strange training session. No photos were released to the media. No social media post referred to the CEO or the new policy, but something quietly spread. No hashtags, no headlines. And it didn't come from Malik. It came from Mr. Eddie. At the flagship store, the same one where the $2,470 tie incident happened, the epicenter of the viral video, something unusual began to occur. Every morning, customers walking in were greeted with a simple, sincere line. "Welcome. I hope today feels lighter than yesterday." It wasn't a printed script. It wasn't from a customer service manual. It was from Mr. Eddie, the only security guard ever asked to tell a story. No one told him to greet people like that. No one checked his punctuality. But ever since that training, Mr. Eddie had switched from night shift to morning because, in his words, "I want to be the first face they see." And every time a customer responded positively, he would write it down, by hand, in an old leather notebook he called the Journal of the Unasked. 3 weeks passed, and that notebook had 71 handwritten pages. One entry read, 9:12 a.m. Young black woman named Clarissa in a worn hoodie was glanced at but not acknowledged by a manager. I greeted her. She smiled, paused, said, "Thank you. You're the first person today to look at me like a normal human." A beauty counter employee, who once dismissed Mr. Eddie as old, slow, and invisible, started having lunch with him in the break room. She said, "I used to think he had nothing to say, but he knows more customer names than anyone here." Another admitted, "I see him writing every day, and I've started feeling ashamed that I never asked what he's writing about." The story of the security guard who records what customers say began spreading to other branches. One store in Portland sent someone to observe him. A store in Miami reprinted several journal entries and pinned them on the staff bulletin board. And from those handwritten lines, a proposal emerged, called Project Eddie, not from headquarters, but from frontline staff. The project asked each store to appoint one employee, not a manager, to act as a culture observer, to document small interactions, not to evaluate, but to feel. No one was scored, no one was rewarded, but everyone felt lighter, knowing someone was quietly listening to them as people. In the Sacramento branch, an employee named Thomas, a delivery associate, was chosen as observer. He wrote, "An older woman didn't buy anything, but she stood in front of the perfume mirror for a long time. I walked over and said, 'Have you tried any scents today?' She replied, 'No one's asked me that in 2 years.'" In Phoenix, a cashier named June wrote, "I used to cry when customers yelled at me. Today I cried because a little kid gave me a stick of gum and said I looked kind of sad. I wrote it in the journal to remind myself that I can still feel things." And while these changes unfolded quietly, Malik Carter remained absent from the press. But Mr. Eddie didn't. A small blog post on the internal company site was shared over 800 times that week, titled, "The Only One Who Says Hello. Now He's the Reason I Didn't Quit." In it, an employee wrote, "I was going to quit after that training, but Mr. Eddie told me, 'Stay, because if you leave, who will fix what you saw was wrong?'" Malik didn't request the post, but when he read it, he sent Mr. Eddie a 5-word email. "We are beginning it now." Mr. Eddie didn't reply, but the next morning he placed a framed printout on the reception desk. "I'm not here to fix the system. I'm just here to remind people, the system starts with eye contact." 3 weeks later, monthly revenue reports started coming in. No major spike, but the returning customer within 30 days metric jumped, especially in branches previously rated the lowest. And something unprecedented in company history happened. 1/3 of all customer feedback this month was thank you letters. More than 60% of them mentioned the phrase, "the man at the door," or "the old security guard with the notebook." A regional director named Katrina, who once opposed the whisper line policy, wrote a handwritten note to Malik. "I used to believe systems only change when the smartest person walked in, but now I see systems begin to change when the least noticed person is heard." Malik didn't reply, but he printed that quote and quietly hung it in his office, without the author's name. At a coffee shop near headquarters, a group of customers who had previously spoken out about the incident returned for the first time. They didn't shop. They simply stood silently at the entrance. When asked why, they said, "We came to see if he was real. And when we saw him greet people, not perform, we believed something real might be happening." In the end-of-month internal meeting, Malik gave no new directives. Instead, he played an unedited video clip, just Mr. Eddie greeting customers. No narration, no music, just the image of an elderly man gently nodding to each person whether they were wealthy or modestly dressed. Then Malik turned off the screen and said, "We don't have to change the world in a week. We just need enough people who won't turn away when they see something worth fixing." That's how a man once forgotten by name became the center of a cultural resurrection. Not through authority, not through announcements, but through presence. That morning at exactly 9:04 a.m., the flagship store received a strange appointment. A man booked under a pseudonym. Mr. M, no request for a stylist. No request for a private room. Just a brief note. I want to try on the jacket I was once denied. Your most expensive one. The front desk staff shivered slightly. They had been trained. They knew the story. They no longer dared to joke about customers who looked modest. But this man still made them nervous. He wore the exact same old blazer that had caused everything. Still wrinkled. Still faded. Still nameless. But this time, no one dared to look at him with suspicion. Not a single employee stepped forward to stop him. And no one offered him water, as was customary, not out of disdain, but because they didn't know how to behave. They were watching. The man walked into the luxury menswear section, precisely the spot where he had once been denied service. And there, no one else but Marissa, the veteran associate who had called the manager that day, was rearranging the display shelf. She froze when she saw him, not because he stood out, but because she remembered that look, the look of someone once insulted, yet didn't retaliate. And now, he had returned, not with rage, but with a silence heavier than any accusation. "Which jacket would you like to try?" Marissa asked, her voice trembling. Malik didn't answer right away. He simply raised his hand and pointed toward the glass corner where the $8,000 Italian silk jacket was displayed, the very one she had turned away from when he pointed at it before. Marissa swallowed hard. She walked over, took the jacket, and handed it to him with trembling hands. No one said another word. Malik walked into the fitting room. The door closed. The entire floor held its breath. 5 minutes later, the door opened. Malik stepped out, the $8,000 jacket fitting him perfectly, down to every seam. But no one was paying attention to the jacket. Every eye was fixed on his expression, not anger, not threat, not pride, just a gaze filled with sadness. He walked to the register, placed the jacket down, offered no card, quoted no price. He simply said, "I'm not buying this jacket. I want it returned to the display." But this time, include a story. The story of someone who was once denied because he wore an unnamed jacket, and who returns today, not to wear the expensive one, but to ask, what have we learned since that first day? Marissa stood frozen. The manager came out, ready to offer an apology. But Malik raised a hand. "I'm not here for anyone to apologize. I came to see whether you've changed." Then he turned to Marissa. "Do you remember what you said that day?" Marissa lowered her head. She remembered, very clearly. That sentence had never left her mind. "People like you don't belong here." She trembled. "I remember." Malik nodded. "So do I. But today, I want something different." She looked up. He met her eyes. "I want you to be the one to rewrite the description for this display, in your own handwriting. Tell exactly what happened, and sign your name." Silence fell over the space, not out of fear, but because no one had imagined an ending like this. No one was fired. No one was shamed in public. There was only one request: write it, using memory and conscience. Marissa returned to the counter. She wrote, word for word, no edits, no deflection. The small placard was replaced that same day. It read, "This jacket was once the reason someone was denied service, because he didn't dress like someone with money, but he returned, not to retaliate, but to remind us that kindness shouldn't depend on the brand a customer wears. This story is true, and I am the one who wrote both versions, one in a wrong act and one in the truth that needs to be remembered. Marissa G., sales associate." The sign was placed directly under a ceiling light. Each day, hundreds of visitors stopped to read it, not to shop, but to understand, to feel, to remember. Malik left the store in silence. But this time, he didn't leave alone. A group of employees walked him out. No words, just a nod. Gentle. enough to shift an entire industry. A week later, stores across the country launched new storyware displays, each item accompanied by a real story about a real person once misjudged, not to shock, but to educate the customer, to remind them they're not just buying clothes, they're touching the memory of a system that once got it wrong and is now learning to make it right. At an industry conference, someone asked Malik, "What makes you think a jacket could change an entire industry?" He simply replied, "Because that jacket once got someone excluded, and today it reminds us that value isn't in the price tag, but in how we treat the person wearing it." By the end of the year, Malik's company won the National Business Ethics Award, not for revenue, but for redefining the entire concept of service through a real story. But Malik declined to accept it himself. He sent a representative, Mr. Eddy. When Mr. Eddy took the stage, he said simply, "I don't have an MBA. I don't know the buzzwords. But I do know this. When a system learns to bow its head, it doesn't grow weaker. It proves it still has a heart." The entire room rose to their feet. Applause thundered, not for the CEO, but for the security guard, who once simply said hello each morning. This story didn't end with punishment. It ended with memory. And memory, when recorded by the one who once got it wrong, holds more power than any policy. An industry doesn't change with a new signboard. It changes when those who once stayed silent begin writing the truth with their own hands.
And that is how a jacket once dismissed rewrote an entire industry, not through law, not through money, but through memory. A memory strong enough to compel those who once got it wrong to correct it with their own hands. If you're smiling right now, because you believe kindness can change a whole system. If you're feeling a warmth inside, because someone like Mr. Eddy finally stood on that stage. Or if you're angry, because maybe you or someone you love was once treated like they weren't worth being welcomed. Then please, don't keep those feelings to yourself. Leave a comment below. Tell us when you were misjudged and what it taught you. Hit like. If you believe a person's worth has nothing to do with what they wear. And subscribe so we can keep telling stories like this, where justice doesn't have to shout to be heard. Because this world doesn't need more judgment. What it needs is more of those nameless jackets being seen through eyes of kindness.